Then the Allies took the offensive, sending out strong forces supported by machine guns and light artillery landed from the warships, ready to send task forces into the interior. The strategy was to prevent Mataafa concentrating his forces in any one spot, and by burning the villages of his supporters, turn them against their chief. The strategy was to prove not only counterproductive, but it led to disaster. The first battle took place at Magiaji, one of Mataafa's main strongpoints, when 60 seamen and marines with 200 of Malietoa's supporters confronted 300 rebels. On the eve of battle, some of the rebels posed for a German photographer. The bravado of the warriors in the old photograph was matched by their bravery in action. They stood their ground against a storm of machine gun fire that eventually broke up their ranks, and then loyal and rebel Samoa. Admiral Coutts sent out a strong force on 31 March, Good Friday of 1899. It marched through Waiala and beyond, burning several villages loyal to Mataafa and destroying 50 canoes, including several large seagoing canoes. They marched along this coastline east of Apia. They also burnt an ancient ceremonial canoe held in great veneration by the locals, perhaps this vessel photographed in the 1880s. The act of destroying such a venerated vessel ranked as a war crime to the Samoans. The Allies did not comprehend such an interpretation of their actions. To them it seemed as if they had hit upon a successful formula for keeping the forces of Mataafa on the run. However, the Allied command had underestimated Mataafa and his strategic insights. While the naval columns had advanced along the coast, Mataafa had bypassed them and launched a devastating attack on Apia. The US and British consulates were held, but at the cost of heavy casualties, including 5 British seamen killed defending the Tivoli Hotel near the courthouse. The attackers were only forced to retreat when the Philadelphia launched a heavy bombardment, which did a lot of damage to Apia, and for which the Americans later had to pay compensation. The Admiral decided that the defence of Apia required more firepower, and he directed that most of the machine guns and light artillery be placed in the consulates. Admiral Coutts also determined that the strategy of aggressive sweeps through rebel territory should continue. Next day, Easter Saturday, 1 April 1899, the largest force yet was assembled. 118 British sailors and US sailors and marines mustered with around 200 loyal Samoans and were ordered to find and burn Mataafa's headquarters. As most of the artillery was in the consulates, the column would take only a single Colt machine gun. Command of the column was given to Lieutenant Gaunt. As they were preparing to leave, Lieutenant Angel Freeman of HMS Tauranga asked Sturdy for the command of the column instead of Gaunt, and as he was senior to Gaunt, he was given the command. Freeman apologised to the Australian for taking away the opportunity to lead the column into action, and hopefully win glory and promotion, and he added the words, "I'm awfully sorry, old chap, but my promotion depends upon it, and in any case, you're much too young for this." Meanwhile, half of the Philadelphia's Marines were detailed for the defence of the US consulate, and the US consul, who knew Lieutenant Gaunt well, asked that he be given command as he had the greatest experience. Hence, Gaunt commanded a force of US servicemen for the first time. The goal of the column was determined. It was to be a low hill to the southeast of Apia, once the seat of power of the Tongans, who had ruled Samoa centuries before. The locals called the hill Whangalii, but the Europeans knew it as Tagalii. In 1899, there was a German bungalow on this spot. Lieutenant Freeman led the Allied column up to the bungalow, discussed the situation with the German, Captain Hufnagel. Captain Hufnagel said there were no rebels in the vicinity. With this intelligence, Lieutenant Freeman, with the agreement of the American Lieutenant Lansvale, Lieutenant Freeman ordered the machine gun to be brought into action, but it fired only a few rounds and then it jammed. Without warning, the column came under heavy gunfire from 800 rebels who were dug in concealed positions in the trees and buffalo grass in the higher ground on both sides of the track. There were also snipers in the trees who had orders to shoot at the officers. Lieutenant Angel Freeman, who had hoped for glory and promotion, fell immediately with a bullet through the heart. The attack was brilliantly planned and executed. The only way to escape was for the Allies to fight their way forward, back to the coast. The second in command, Lieutenant Lansdale, desperately tried to clear the machine gun, but he too was brought down, with his right leg shattered by a bullet. Besides the 2 lieutenants who had been hit, 6 other seamen and marines had been killed already, and there were others wounded. US Ensign Monaghan tried to form the surviving seamen and marines into a defensive perimeter, but they were exposed to the deadly gunfire from the trees and had to crouch to find whatever shelter they could. Here and there, groups of rebels made charges to cut off isolated seamen who were still strung out along the long stretch of flat road. It was clear that they would have to move quickly or they would be massacred. The ensign ordered a bugler to sound the retreat back to the beach. Ensign Monaghan elected to stay and help Lieutenant Lansdale, who could not walk with his shattered leg. Survivors heard the lieutenant ordering the ensign to retreat with the others, but Monaghan stayed with his senior officer. He picked off approaching rebels with his revolver, but they were both surrounded and killed. 2 surviving Marine NCOs, Sergeants McNally and Forster, rallied some men to try to charge at the surrounding enemy, but there were too many men wounded. Reluctantly, the sergeants ordered those survivors who could walk and fight to make a staged withdrawal along whatever tracks that they could find leading back to the beach. A Marine private, Henry Hulbert, single-handedly charged a group of warriors and took some pressure off the retreating Allies. For this, he was among those awarded the Medal of Honour. The British cruisers had got word of the ambush and were able to target the Tagalii area with their guns. They laid down heavy fire. The barrage dispersed the attackers and many of them withdrew into the bush, allowing Allied survivors to crawl and stagger back to the coast. Commander Sturdy had stripped Porpoise and Royalist of the bulk of their crews and had landed them on the beach to form a defensive perimeter around the ship's boats, covered by the guns of the warships. The naval gunfire kept the rebels at bay, and Mataafa's men all withdrew as night approached. 1/3 of the Allied force had been killed or wounded in the battle. The bodies of the dead were brought back to be buried on Easter Sunday at a graveyard in Mulinu. Later, French missionaries told the Allies that 38 rebels had been killed in the battle. The Allies had to reconsider their whole anti-insurgent strategy. More ships, HMS Torch and the USS Newark, arrived, the former with a load of rifles intended for the Fiji police. It was decided to arm and form a royal militia to continue the land operations, and the militia was put under the command of Lieutenant Gaunt. Chief Tamasese distributed rifles while British sailors watched. Over the next 6 weeks, there were skirmishes with the rebels, who had in their turn been reinforced by 2,000 warriors from Savaii Island in the west. Then Mataafa made a rare strategic mistake. In a move away from the immediate coastal area, perhaps underestimating the range of naval gunfire, he concentrated his forces around the hill of Vainima, the very place where Robert Louis Stevenson had made his home. The forces loyal to Malietoa assembled under Lieutenant Gaunt's command and marched to take up positions at the foot of the hill. They were disconcerted to find that Mataafa had constructed 2 rows of fortifications around the house. They were probably constructed with German advice, for flying from the flagpole of Stevenson's house was the Imperial German ensign. In Velima today, there are no signs of battle. But in the bush, just in front of Stevenson's house, there are these lines of stones, remnants of stone walls. Perhaps, indeed probably, what's left of Mataafa's lines of fortifications. Fortifications taken at great cost in British, American and Samoan blood. The ensuing battle was not a subtle affair, being instead a bare-knuckled brawl. After a naval bombardment, Malietoa's men charged first one fortified line, and then, the following dawn, the second line. Gaunt took the German ensign from its pole, and shortly afterwards the battle ended as the rebel warriors withdrew, leaving behind many casualties. A peace agreement was signed soon afterwards. To the surprise of some, Mataafa meticulously kept the peace terms. As part of the agreement, Mataafa surrendered all his followers' firearms, and they were taken on board the US ship Badger. Mataafa Josefa retained a place of honour among his people and died in 1912, aged 84. The bloody field, once known to the Allies as Tagalii, the site of Mataafa's remarkable battle and his defeat of a heavily armed British and American force, is now underneath the runway of Whangalii Airport. Few tourists would comprehend the heroism and the tragedy that once took place here beneath the tarmac where aircraft now land and take off.